I don't know if anything that I know about her is true.
Who is Lilith?
Over the years, Netflix has become the go-to place for true crime fans, and rightfully so. Because say what you want about Netflix's movie collection, you have to admit, they know their thing when it comes to true crime. And that brings us to today's topic of discussion, A Toxic Love Story, that's been streaming since July 22nd, 2026, and pretty much had everyone's jaws hit the floor by minute 10. The premise itself sounds insane, because you have Michelle Hadley, a California woman who spent 88 days locked up in 2016 after her ex-fiancé, then Deputy U.S. Marshal Ian Diaz, and his brand new wife, Angela Connell, accusing her of sending them threatening emails and setting up fake Craigslist ads soliciting a rape fantasy at their condo. I know, it sounds insane. And then we're hit with curveball after curveball because the whole nightmare was actually orchestrated by the two victims themselves. It's a wild case, and the documentary manages to cover most of it in 90 minutes. But there are some things that the documentary had to take liberties with because, it's 90 minutes. So here are the 12 real details about Michelle, Ian, and Angela's case that Netflix didn't show you.
I do not hate Michelle. I have never hated Michelle. I just wanted her out of my life.
Ian filed a restraining order against Michelle months before any of this started. This has to be one of the most insane and important details about this case that the documentary skipped in its timeline. In the documentary, we get the vibe that once Lilith is Truth started emailing Angela, eventually the couple filed for the restraining order against Michelle. But in reality, back in September 2015, even before the emails ever happened, Ian had already gone to the court trying to get a restraining order against Michelle, stating that she was emotionally unstable and had a history of fits of rage. Basically cashing in on that crazy woman trope that Michelle talked about in the documentary. But the judge dismissed the request, and it isn't even clear if Michelle even knew about it at the time. And with this crucial detail omitted, the story starts off with an innocent couple under attack from a vindictive ex. But if Ian was already trying to build a legal paper trail against Michelle 8 months before the campaign even began, then the innocent couple narrative doesn't really work, because it suggests that he may have been laying groundwork long before Angela ever called the police. Michelle has since said that she had a feeling that something was coming. On the Crime Scene podcast, she stated that one time Ian asked her, out of nowhere, how she'd feel if she were a prisoner convicted of a sexual crime, and then described those inmates' conditions in detail. Understandably, she told him that it would be her worst nightmare. Little did she know that this was an early preview of what he had in store for her. Now, I'm not saying that this proves a premeditation on its own, but you get what I'm trying to say, right? Michelle says Ian was already controlling her long before Lilith ever showed up. In the third act of the documentary, we get the big reveal of what Ian was like with Michelle when they were in a relationship. But the documentary didn't focus much on their relationship, as it was more focused on the DOJ's investigation of Ian. But when Michelle spoke with BuzzFeed News, we found out just how controlling Ian was. According to Michelle, Ian had always been very controlling over her, be it appearance, travel, work, whatever. If she drove somewhere other than school, home, or work, he would immediately give her a call. This was briefly touched on in the documentary, but what the documentary didn't tell us was that Ian wanted her to quit her marketing job for a role at Disneyland Resort. The job was $20,000 less than Michelle's current job. And looking back at it, Michelle believes that the real reason why Ian was pushing this onto her was because he wanted his old colleagues to keep an eye on her. This adds a new layer of horror into their relationship, because I feel like when it comes to those little jabs at appearance or belly button piercings or clothes, one could excuse that, saying, oh, Ian was just trying to guide her or make her more pretty. But financial abuse like this, that's hard to explain away. The alleged surveillance didn't stop after the breakup, according to Michelle. Usually, you would assume that a breakup would bring a close to the harrowing relationship. But really, for Michelle, This was just another start. In the podcast, she recalled that the first time she wanted to leave the relationship, Ian pulled out his phone and threatened to call the police on her simply because she wanted to break up. She said he was already using his association with law enforcement as a mechanism to control me. And when she managed to run away in the summer of 2015, this threat became very real. Michelle repeatedly spotted SUVs identical to Ian's parked near her home with no license plates. It was so bad that Michelle would change her daily routine out of fear. She got so concerned that she had to inform her university about it, which barred Ian from campus as a result. Now, all of these claims came from Michelle's own account, given years after the incident rather than a court finding. But when you line them all up with the broader picture that the prosecutors had come up with, it seems like Michelle had every reason to be worried. There was a clear financial motive sitting underneath the frame job. Even though they didn't spell it out in the documentary, I feel like you can always put two and two together. The most damning detail in this whole case is real estate. In 2015, Michelle and Ian bought a condo together in Anaheim. Michelle covered the entire down payment for that condo, which was more than $14,000, and she continued to pay half the mortgage even after they split. The plan they agreed on was Ian would do the mortgage while she did the down payment, and if he couldn't afford it, they would sell the place. The deadline by which Ian had to sell the condo was June 2016, the same month when Angela started to receive the emails from Lilith is Truth. According to Michelle's later court findings, she learned in early June 2016 that Ian's application to assume the mortgage on his own was denied, and weeks after that, she was hauled off to prison. The federal prosecutors would actually go on to argue that Ian's financial stake in the condo gave him tangible motive to frame Michelle. If she was in jail facing charges, then she wouldn't be able to fight with him over property rights. Suddenly, that makes this story a lot more calculated, doesn't it? And guess what? Ian sold the condo when Michelle was in jail, and she never got her down payment back. This loss actually became central to the advocacy work she does today. But holy moly, that must have hurt. I can't even fathom just how much money that would be now, considering inflation and all. Michelle and Angela had never actually met before standing in a courtroom together. Throughout the first half of the documentary and the court case, Michelle is framed as this really obsessed woman, right? But here's the thing. Michelle had barely any real-world contact with Angela at all. According to Michelle, they had never actually spoken to each other until Angela's restraining order hearing, where Michelle learned for the first time what allegations were made against her. She's described the moment itself a lot in her account. Angela walked over and handed her a stack of printed out emails, the supposed Lilith is Truth messages, in person right there in the courtroom, while friends and family who were there to support Ian and Angela were gawking and giggling, in Michelle's words, treating this whole incident like a spectacle. It's kind of painful when you sit with that image for a bit. Michelle was grossly outnumbered by everyone at any given moment. No one was asking her for her side of the story. She was walking into a legal process that was already stacked against her. But that's why Michelle owns the name Lilith the way she does now. Because emotionally speaking, she was truly a revolutionary in her own way. The digital evidence timeline looks different in court filings than it does on screen. This is one of the biggest gaps between the actual paper trail and the documentary's pacing. So according to Michelle, back in May and June of 2016, she got a string of alarming digital red flags. She got a Google alert telling her that an email she didn't even remember creating was shut down. She got a Microsoft notification telling her that one of her real accounts was being used as a backup for newly created Outlook addresses. She even got a message from Craigslist itself asking her to verify an ad titled something like Rape Fantasy that was posted with her identity. She reported the ad to Craigslist, and she also called the Anaheim police multiple times to warn them about these things because she genuinely believed that someone was impersonating her online. She left no stone unturned as she went to her university, her employer, and even the Department of Justice. But none of these multiple calls she made led anywhere before her arrest. And as if that wasn't enough, according to Michelle's civil filings, police had already obtained Craigslist records tying one of the fake ads to Ian's own personal email address even before her first arrest. And then, additional evidence later surfaced connecting another account used in the harassment campaign to Ian's IP address. But despite all of that, Michelle was still arrested twice, in June 2016 and then in July for more serious charges. In the documentary, Michelle is kind of painted as someone who had no idea what was happening before the police showed up to arrest her. But the paper trail indicates that she knew and she tried to sound the alarm, but no one actually listened. Which makes the revelation that she sued the Anaheim Police Department later all the more satisfying. Investigators say Michelle's own old emails gave the couple a real-life template to copy. Now, there is something we all must have wondered. Why did the fake Lilith is Truth emails sound the way they sounded? Well, the answer to that is hella messed up. After Michelle and Ian's relationship ended, Michelle had a nervous breakdown from complex PTSD. She had a dissociative episode, and she ended up basically wandering out into nowhere in Arizona. It was an out-of-body experience for her, and while having that experience for 24 hours, she sent Ian 2 angry emails. These messages leaned on to religious language from her upbringing, basically warning Ian that he would be held accountable for whatever he had done to her. But that was months before Lilith is Truth ever surfaced. Then, a while later, when Angela started to get anonymous threatening emails, there was some kind of religious phrasing running through them. Eventually, the prosecutors concluded that Ian and Angela had essentially used Michelle's own real and angry emails as a stylistic template to make fake messages, so that anyone who would look at them would assume they had come from the same person. To make it look authentic, the couple had actually routed the fabricated emails through multiple accounts and VPNs, building a trail deliberately designed to point back at Michelle. The level of premeditation and determination required to pull something off like this is insane. The documentary first shows you the emails as evidence against Michelle, and then we get the big reveal that they were faked. But I wish they had dwelled a little more on how the specific voice of these messages were actually made up for more than 1 minute, because that's just chilling. The Craigslist ads were reportedly sending men straight to Ian's own front door. I never thought there would be a day where Craigslist would become crucial evidence for a case, but here we are. According to the reporting on the case, the ads actually sent real strangers to an Anaheim condo who were eager to play out a consensual non-consent play arranged with Angela. On multiple occasions, the men showed up at the door expecting Angela, only to find Ian there, armed and identifying himself using his U.S. Marshal's badge. Because in the documentary, the ads were the mechanism to frame Michelle and to build this narrative that she was planning sexual assault against Angela. And in the latter half of the documentary, you hear from one of the investigators that it was kind of insane that Ian was waiting for the police after Ian and Angela called 911 for a possible rape threat with a gun and a badge. The investigator mentioned in the documentary that this was a ploy that Ian was using to make the police on scene believe him, playing into the whole, "I'm one of you guys, please trust me" thing. But now that you have this detail, it could be that maybe there was more to the whole Craigslist ads than we were led to believe. Because by Michelle's own accounts, Ian definitely had some particular kinks, and those kinks kind of line up with those ads, if you guys get my drift. Plus, imagine how terrifying the whole situation was for those strangers who actually responded to those posts and showed up in person. Maybe they deserved it, but this little scheme could have ruined so many people if things went out of hand. It took the federal government 4 more years to actually arrest Ian. Because of the structure of the documentary, it's really easy to miss this detail, but Angela and Ian's cases moved in two completely different places. Angela was arrested in January 2017, soon after Michelle was fully exonerated, and Angela pleaded guilty for all charges later that year. Ian, on the other hand, well, that's a different can of worms. The Department of Justice's Office of Inspector General opened its investigation in 2017 for Ian, right around the time Angela's case was being resolved. But Ian was then arrested in May 2021, about 4 more years later. His federal trial wrapped up in March 2023, when a jury convicted him on 4 counts: conspiracy to commit cyberstalking, perjury, and obstructing a federal proceeding. And this gap matters because for years, Ian was walking around in public as this wronged ex-husband whose wife had gone rogue. Michelle, meanwhile, had already been fully cleared in early 2017 and spent a better part of a decade watching one half of her framing case get built against the man who was always after her. In reality, this case took about 7 years before Ian was held accountable for his actions, which the documentary compresses into a tidy resolution near the end. Angela and Ian's sentences weren't as parallel as you'd expect. Despite both of them being part of this scheme, their punishments were vastly different. Angela pleaded guilty to fraud, false imprisonment, and falsely reporting a crime. She was sentenced to 5 years in state prison for all of this. Ian was convicted on federal charges of conspiracy to commit cyberstalking, perjury, and obstruction of federal proceeding, which led him to getting sentenced to just over 10 years in federal prison, roughly double Angela's sentence. This gap happened because Angela was the one who made the initial 911 call, claiming she had been attacked, and that false report is what got Anaheim police moving against Michelle. So in a very real sense, she was the public face of the original accusation. Ian, on the other hand, spent years as a sympathetic bystander who was caught in the middle of this feud. The documentary lands its ending on both of them facing consequences, which is important, but it doesn't walk us through how differently those consequences actually affected their sentences, which would have been truly something to watch. Where is Michelle today? Since her exoneration, Michelle has rebuilt her life from scratch. She earned a master's degree, moved across the country to work in marketing, and now she's raising a young daughter who was born on the exact same day Ian was convicted. And Michelle has gone on to become a genuine advocate for domestic violence survivors. She specifically focuses on financial abuse, a subject she knows firsthand. She has cited statistics suggesting the overwhelming majority of women who experience abuse also experience some form of financial abuse alongside it, and she's used her platform to argue that survivors shouldn't be left to navigate the financial mess of it all by themselves. She's also gone on record saying that becoming a mother has shaped the way she thinks about resilience because she now tries to reframe the princess language that surrounds young girls and instead uses a language of bravery and courage because that's what being a princess is all about. Angela declined to take part in the documentary, and here's what's known about her now. I'm sure you all noticed that both Ian and Angela are absent from the documentary. Well, producer Emma Supple had reached out to everyone central to the story before production, and Angela ultimately chose not to participate in the filming. As Supple put it, the filmmakers don't know much about what Angela is up to beyond the basics. We know that Angela served her 5-year state sentence and was released to parole supervision after receiving credit for time served. Since then, she's moved out of California and has relocated to Arizona. Multiple outlets have reported that she now goes by a shortened version of her first name and works in the field of reproductive health advocacy. She also got a graduate degree after her release, and now she's connected with an organization connected to abortion access. Now, the news regarding her work is reported by a single outlet, so it is a claim worth double-checking. But what we do know is that she has rebuilt a life away from California, and she wanted no part in revisiting this story on camera for Netflix. And with that, we've come to the end of our video. In my eyes, this is a fitting final beat for this documentary. The narrative that the two people pushed onto everyone, well, that's broken, and no one knows much about them now. And the victim that everyone hated on, she is thriving and inspiring a new generation of people just like a princess would. Let me know in the comments which detail from this case surprised you the most. For me, it was definitely the paper trail, because what the heck was that? Hey, like and subscribe as always, and I'll see you guys next time.